So if you're considering buying land, we bought all of this land and we are currently building our metal shop, 60 by 40 steel building, which is going to be a barn door. And we've been living on this land in our RV while we build. So there's a few things that you're going to want to know before you end up buying your land. And this is stuff that we just got really lucky on because I didn't know these things before I bought the land. So the first thing that you're going to want to know is that most of these listings land listings will say there's power to the property or power on the property. And that sounds great. But here's the thing, if you have power poles on the property or power run to the property, you're still going to have to run it to the actual panel. If you look at our property, all the way down at the bottom is a power pole. And if we wanted to pull from that power pole, we would have had to either do overhead, which was the cheaper option, or dig and put an underground cable in there. And that would have added a lot of money to our project that we weren't really planning on, because when we saw that it had power to the property, we thought to ourselves, being city slickers, like, okay, there's power there, it's no problem, right? It sounds great. The truth is you got to pay for that. If you're in certain areas, there's certain areas that we really liked that were very alpine and built on the side of the mountains. There can be up to $15,000 per pole cost to get your power run from the power poles that are existing to the land spot that you want to build on. Ultimately, we ended up building, this is going to be our shop house until we build our main house, which is going to be right here. But our shop house is actually right next to a power pole. And interestingly enough, this is a private utility. It's not a public utility. We got the public utility down there on the bottom. It's actually on the property. The private utility's up here. With the private utility, we had to get an easement because the neighbors had it built on their land. We got an easement and we were able to use the power pole, which was already there, and actually didn't cost us anything. So we got very, very lucky on that. So you need to know, how much does it cost to put in per pole? What is the cost for running, figure out where you want to build to and where the power is. And then once that's figured out, you need to have a plan on septic. I think septic and water are equally as important, right? You don't necessarily know what your well is going to be if you don't have city water, like a lot of places out in the middle of nowhere have no water. You have well drilling companies that know the area, especially if you're in a small town like we are. There's only 2 well drilling companies, and so called up the well drilling company and they said, oh yeah, I drilled your neighbor's wells. We got great water. It's at 220 feet. Our well ended up being at 260 feet. We got great water flow. We got 36 gallons per minute. So you need to know how much water there is and things around you, because that's generally a good kind of estimate for if it's going to be a good amount of water for your property, especially if you want to do farming and things like that. You need to know how much water you have so that you know what you're working with. If you don't have water or it's really deep, I was looking, some people in Texas are drilling like 780 feet down to get down. The way that well drilling works is that they charge you by the foot. And so when they're drilling, you're hoping that they reach water, past the bedrock and get it as quickly as possible. But it's ultimately like you're gambling and you just don't know what it's going to end up being. So that's always kind of a variable cost. You don't know. You're just going to generally guess based on how other properties are. But you're always hoping for good water flow as shallow as possible. Obviously, they have to go through the bedrock and get to a certain depth. But I think that's very important. The other thing is septic. And right here, we have a very unusual septic system. So actually, the person who did our driveway and our excavation, which didn't go to plan at all, they quoted us for putting our septic system in. And they quoted us $66,000. And that is a ton of money for a septic system. If you've been researching what septic systems cost, I was looking at a website before we bought our land, the average septic system costs, I think, $6,700. There's really not that much to it. You have a septic tank, you have a leach field, you have lines that go into it. The problem that we have is we have all of these beautiful rocks here. Beautiful is maybe they're beautiful, maybe they're not. Depends on your opinion. But one thing that I thought was like, oh, there's all these cool rocks on top of the land here. That's cool. We can use them for decorations or something. I didn't think to myself that, hey, all of these rocks that are sitting on top of the land, it's probably rocky underneath the soil too. I just thought, oh, there's surface rocks. There's no such thing as surface rocks, okay? If you have rocks on top, you probably have rocks underneath. What we ended up having is rocks about 18 inches below all of the ground. And that's a huge problem because it doesn't allow the water to soak in. And so when you have a leach field, you have to do what's called a perk test. With the perk test, it tells you how quickly the ground absorbs the water. The quicker the ground absorbs the water, the shorter the leach field needs to be. And so the cheaper your system is. With all of these rocks, we were gonna have to have a massive system. And the first person that quoted us 66 grand. They just didn't really want the job, obviously. And we ended up finding somebody else to do it, but it was still a lot more expensive than we planned for. So going into this, knowing, or at least understanding what your costs are going to be before you get started is just helpful because you don't have, all of these surprises and things. So that kind of covers your power, your water, and your septic, which are really, really important things. Now, also important to know what permits are required to get your power and to get your septic and things like that. With our county, all we have to have is a septic permit. Once we have a septic permit, we can get our power here. And so that's great. I love the place that we live because we don't have to worry so much about permitting and things like that. It's a really free place and it's awesome. So that's one of the things that I love about out here. Beyond that, doing the road, and I had no experience cutting in roads or excavation and things like that, as well as foundations. Labor is in short supply out here. And one thing that you'll find too is if you're ever out in a rural space, most people don't use websites. In fact, most of the people that were the contractors on this had flip phones, and so they didn't have smartphones, and just very different from where we moved from. And I think it's awesome, but that being the case, you can't necessarily go out and find a bunch of contractors, and so it was very difficult to go and find contractors. So I'll definitely do another video on how to find contractors and how to price them and get quotes and all of those things. But to get started, you need to have a road, you need to have water, power, and then also your septic. So if you have any questions about those things, let me know. We definitely learned a lot. Comment below if you have any questions about those. I hope this was helpful. If you want to follow along our journey on building and see how it looks, be sure to subscribe. We'll see you on the next video. Have a good one.